Every Sunday morning, Thomas Randele played golf with his friends. One of those friends was an FBI agent based in Boston. They played together for years. They talked, they laughed, they spent their Sunday mornings just like any ordinary friends. The agent never suspected a thing, because the man he was looking for wasn't named Thomas Randele. It was Ted Conrad. They were the same person. In 1969, Ted Conrad was 20 years old. On a quiet Friday afternoon, he walked into work carrying nothing unusual. Hours later, he walked out carrying a plain brown paper bag. Inside was $215,000 in cash. No gun, no mask, no hostages, no getaway driver. He simply walked out the front door and disappeared. For the next 52 years, he built an entirely new life. He sold luxury cars, got married, raised a daughter, coached her soccer team, paid his taxes, and lived the kind of quiet middle-class life that never attracts attention. He settled just 3 miles from where his favorite movie, The Thomas Crown Affair, had been filmed, a movie about a man who robs a bank and successfully disappears. Ted Conrad didn't just watch that movie, he lived it, until one evening in 2021. After a round of chemotherapy, he turned to his wife and daughter and quietly said, "Ladies, I need to tell you something. The authorities are probably still looking for me." This is the story of Ted Conrad, the man who watched the same movie 6 times, and then spent the next 52 years living its ending. Most people walked out of the theater entertained. Ted Conrad walked out with something far more dangerous: the belief that fiction could become reality. A few months later, in early 1969, he accepted a job at Society National Bank in downtown Cleveland as a vault teller assistant. His job was simple: count cash, bundle it, and prepare it for delivery to branches across the city. Every day, hundreds of thousands of dollars passed through his hands. And every day, he noticed the same thing. The money itself was heavily protected inside the vault. The security surrounding it was not. At first, he mentioned it casually to friends. He joked that someone could probably walk out with a fortune if they really wanted to. Nobody believed him. They laughed. They thought he was showing off. They had no reason to think he was being serious. They were wrong. On July 11th, 1969, the day after his 20th birthday, Ted Conrad met his best friend, Russell Metcalf, for lunch. They ate together like they had many times before, talking about ordinary things on what seemed to be an ordinary Friday. Metcalf had no idea it would be the last time he would ever see Ted Conrad. After lunch, Conrad returned to Society National Bank and headed toward the vault. Everything looked routine. Everything felt routine. Inside, he began doing exactly what his job required him to do. He counted the cash, bundled it neatly, and stacked it in front of him. Then, instead of preparing it for delivery, he quietly placed bundle after bundle into a plain brown paper bag. No alarms sounded, no one shouted, no one reached for a phone. Conrad wasn't breaking into the vault, he already belonged there. To everyone around him, he was simply another trusted employee doing his job. When the bag was full, he picked it up, walked out of the vault, crossed the banking floor, and headed for the front entrance. Employees saw him leave, customers saw him leave, nobody questioned him, why would they? It was Friday afternoon, and he looked exactly like every other employee heading home after work. Within moments, he was outside. There was no dramatic chase, no waiting getaway car, no elaborate escape plan. Ted Conrad simply walked away. Behind him, business carried on as usual. The bank closed for the weekend, completely unaware that $215,000 had just left the building inside the most ordinary paper bag imaginable. The vault wouldn't be opened again until Monday morning. By then, Ted Conrad was already gone. The theft wasn't discovered until Monday morning. When bank managers opened the vault on July 14th, they immediately realized $215,000 was missing. Employee records were checked. Ted Conrad hadn't shown up for work. Within hours, a federal warrant was issued for his arrest. By then, however, Conrad was already hundreds of miles away. In the days that followed, 2 letters arrived for his girlfriend back in Cleveland. One had been mailed from Washington, D.C., the other from Los Angeles. He wrote that he loved her, that he missed her, and that he was sorry. In one of the letters, he said he believed he only had to stay away for 7 years before the statute of limitations expired. What he didn't know was that a federal indictment had already changed everything. The clock he thought he was waiting out no longer mattered. After those letters, the trail went cold. Ted Conrad disappeared completely. He never contacted his parents again. He never reached out to his sister. He never spoke to his closest friends. For decades, the people who had known him were left wondering whether he was alive at all. Some eventually assumed he had died somewhere under another name. Then history quietly buried his story. Just 5 days after the robbery, Apollo 11 launched toward the moon. 4 days later, Neil Armstrong took humanity's first steps onto the lunar surface. Newspapers, television broadcasts, and the attention of the entire world shifted almost overnight. The story of a young bank employee who vanished with a paper bag full of cash was pushed aside by one of the greatest moments in human history. The public moved on. The U.S. Marshals did not. Over the next 5 decades, investigators followed leads across California, Hawaii, Texas, Oregon, Washington, D.C., and countless other places. His photograph appeared on wanted posters, television programs, and investigative bulletins. Every promising lead ended the same way: nowhere. As the years passed, the case files kept growing. Eventually, investigators filled 20 binders with reports, interviews, tips, and dead ends. They were searching for Ted Conrad. The problem was, Ted Conrad no longer existed. Sometime in early 1970, roughly 6 months after the robbery, Ted Conrad arrived in Boston with a new identity. He now called himself Thomas Randele. Exactly how he established that identity remains unclear. Investigators have never publicly disclosed every step. What is known is that he appeared at a Social Security Administration office under the name Thomas Randele, obtained a Social Security number, and quietly began building an entirely new life. At the time, the system was nothing like it is today. Government agencies didn't share information through interconnected databases. There were no digital records, no facial recognition, and no instant background checks. If the paperwork appeared legitimate, there was little reason to question it. That single identity became the foundation of everything that followed. With a valid Social Security number, he opened a bank account. With a bank account, he established a credit history. That credit history allowed him to obtain a driver's license, buy a home, build a career, and file taxes year after year under the name Thomas Randele. In 2014, he even filed for bankruptcy in federal court. Nothing about his identity raised suspicion. Looking back, investigators believe this was the moment the search became almost impossible. The FBI was looking for Ted Conrad. They were not looking for Thomas Randele. As long as those two identities never crossed paths, there was no reason for the system to connect them. Every background check on Thomas Randele came back clean, because Thomas Randele had never robbed a bank. Investigators also believe the name itself may not have been chosen by accident. They suspect Conrad selected Thomas as a tribute to the Thomas Crown Affair, the film that had fascinated him just a year earlier. Then came another remarkable coincidence. He didn't flee overseas. He didn't disappear into the wilderness. Instead, he settled just outside Boston, only a few miles from where the Thomas Crown Affair had been filmed. It was almost as if he wasn't running away from the story, he was living inside it. For the next 5 decades, Ted Conrad disappeared. Thomas Randele did not. He built a life so ordinary that no one had any reason to question it. In the 1970s, he worked at a country club outside Boston, first as a golf instructor and later as its manager. During that time, he met a woman named Kathy. They married in 1982 and eventually welcomed a daughter, Ashley. To everyone who knew him, Thomas Randele was exactly the kind of man every neighborhood hopes to have. He was dependable, soft-spoken, kind. He coached his daughter's soccer team, showed up for school events, and rarely missed an important moment in her life. Friends remembered him as thoughtful, courteous, and genuinely warm. One former colleague later put it best, "The man I knew was completely different from the kid that did this." To the people who knew Thomas Randele, the young bank robber simply didn't exist. Professionally, he built a successful career selling luxury cars, including Land Rovers and Volvos. He wasn't hiding in the shadows. He met customers every day, built relationships, earned trust, and quietly became part of the community. The life he created wasn't glamorous. It was believable. Perhaps the most remarkable part of his story wasn't that he disappeared, it was how completely he blended in. At one point, his image even appeared in local advertising for the dealership where he worked. A man who had been wanted by federal authorities for decades was openly promoting the business he represented, using the same face that had once appeared on wanted posters, and still, no one recognized him. Then, there was golf. Over the years, Randele became close friends with a number of local golfers. One of them was an FBI agent based in Boston. They played together regularly, shared conversations, shared drinks, shared years of friendship. The agent had spent his career investigating fugitives and violent criminals. He never realized one of them was standing beside him on the first tee. There was, however, one part of his new life that never quite fit. Kathy had always dreamed of visiting France. She brought it up more than once over the years. Each time, Thomas found a reason not to go, a better time, too expensive, too busy, always another excuse. Ashley would later say that only after learning her father's true identity did she finally understand why. Within the United States, Thomas Randele's identity had held together for decades. International travel was different. Crossing a border meant passports, immigration records, questions, risk. Whether that was the real reason or not, no one can say for certain. But Kathy never got the trip she had always dreamed of, and Thomas Randele never left the country. For a man who had escaped the law, freedom still had its limits. For more than 50 years, Thomas Randele never told anyone who he really was, not his wife, not his daughter, not his closest friends. He had spent decades protecting a secret so completely that, over time, it became part of who he was. Then, in February 2021, everything changed. Doctors diagnosed him with an aggressive form of lung cancer. He was 71 years old. As the disease progressed, it became clear that he didn't have much time left. After one of his early chemotherapy treatments, he sat at home with Kathy and Ashley. Then, almost without warning, he broke his silence. "Ladies, I need to tell you something. The authorities are probably still looking for me." At first, neither of them understood what he meant. He explained that when he came to Massachusetts many years earlier, he had changed his name. He didn't want to go into details. He simply wanted them to know, in case questions were ever asked after he was gone. Ashley immediately wanted to know his real name. He hesitated, then he finally answered, "Ted." That night, Ashley opened her laptop and typed 2 words into a search engine, Ted Conrad. Within seconds, the screen filled with wanted posters, newspaper articles, and decades of reports about one of Cleveland's most famous bank robberies. The man she had known her entire life, as her father had been a fugitive since long before she was born. She later recalled that the first thing she and her mother told him was simple: "We love you. Learning this doesn't change that, but we need to talk about it." Faced with an impossible situation, Kathy and Ashley made their decision. The man they loved was dying. Whatever had happened in 1969, they weren't going to spend his final weeks turning him over to the authorities. On May 18, 2021, Thomas Randele died at home, surrounded by his family. After more than half a century on the run, Ted Conrad died a free man. For a few months, Ted Conrad's secret died with him. Then, an unexpected clue changed everything. Sometime after his death, someone mailed Thomas Randele's obituary to a crime reporter in Ohio. Tucked inside was a handwritten note suggesting that the man who had just died might actually be Ted Conrad. The tip eventually reached U.S. Marshal Peter Elliott. For Elliott, this wasn't just another cold case. His father, Deputy U.S. Marshal John Elliott, had spent much of his career searching for Ted Conrad. He retired without ever finding him. Now the investigation had become personal. The obituary immediately caught Peter Elliott's attention. Thomas Randele's birthday was listed as July 10, 1947. Ted Conrad's real birthday was July 10, 1949. The day and month were identical, only the year was different. That alone wasn't enough to prove anything, but it was enough to keep digging. Investigators soon discovered that Randele's parents' names matched those of Ted Conrad's parents. His mother's maiden name matched as well. Then came the evidence that finally connected the two identities. Investigators compared Conrad's handwriting from a 1967 college application with handwriting from Thomas Randele's 2014 bankruptcy filing. The match was unmistakable. After 52 years, the search was finally over. In November 2021, Peter Elliott and his team traveled to Lynnfield, Massachusetts, and knocked on the Randele family's front door. Ashley answered. She calmly confirmed what investigators had already begun to suspect. Her father had confessed everything before he died. According to Ashley, the family had planned to contact the authorities themselves. The Marshals simply arrived first. On November 12, 2021, the U.S. Marshals Service officially closed the case. More than half a century after Ted Conrad walked out of a Cleveland bank carrying a plain brown paper bag, the man the government had spent decades searching for had been living an ordinary life all along. Standing before reporters, U.S. Marshal Peter Elliott held up the original arrest warrant issued in 1969. Then, he said something that had nothing to do with Ted Conrad. "I hope my father is resting a little easier today, knowing that his investigation finally brought closure to this case." For the Elliott family, the search had lasted 2 generations. It was finally over. Even after the case was finally closed, several questions remained. The biggest one was obvious. What happened to the money? The answer is, no one knows. The $215,000 was never recovered. Investigators believe Conrad eventually spent it, but exactly how or when it disappeared remains a mystery. By 2014, he had filed for bankruptcy protection, suggesting that whatever fortune he had once walked away with had long since disappeared. Then, there was another question. Did he really cut off everyone from his old life? He did. After mailing those 2 letters to his girlfriend in the days following the robbery, Ted Conrad disappeared completely. He never contacted his parents again. He never reached out to his siblings. He never spoke to his childhood friends. As the years passed, some family members gradually came to believe he had died somewhere under another name. It wasn't until 2021, more than half a century later, that his younger sister finally learned the truth. Her brother had been alive all along, living just a few hundred miles away. Many people also wondered how his wife never suspected anything. The answer may simply be that there was nothing unusual to suspect. Thomas Randele didn't live like a man hiding millions of dollars. He worked for decades selling luxury cars, built a respectable career, paid his bills, and lived what appeared to be an ordinary middle-class life. Friends and coworkers consistently described him as honest, dependable, and deeply devoted to his family. According to those closest to him, the robbery had never been about becoming rich. It had been about proving that he could do it. There was, however, one small detail that stood out only after everything was over. For 52 years, Ted Conrad lived as Thomas Randele. In the end, both men disappeared together.